At the end of this chapter you should be able to understand and appreciate the importance of secularism in a democratic society like India, and learn something about the distinctiveness of Indian secularism. What is secularism? Though Jews faced discrimination for centuries throughout Europe, in the present state of Israel, Arab minorities, both Christian and Muslims, are excluded from social, political and economic benefits available to Jewish citizens. Subtle forms of discrimination also continue to persist against non-Christians in several parts of Europe. The condition of religious minorities in the neighboring states of Pakistan and Bangladesh has also generated considerable concern. Such examples remind us of the continuing importance of secularism for people and societies in today's world. Interreligious domination. In our own country, the Constitution declares that every Indian citizen has a right to live with freedom and dignity in any part of the country. Yet in reality, many forms of exclusion and discrimination continue to persist. Consider three most stark examples. Nearly 4,000 Sikhs were massacred in Delhi and many other parts of the country in 1984. The families of the victims feel that the guilty were not punished. Several thousands of Hindu Kashmiri Pandits have been forced to leave their homes in the Kashmir Valley. They have not been able to return to their homes for more than 2 decades. Nearly 2,000 Muslims were massacred in Gujarat in 2002. The surviving members of many of these families still cannot go back to the villages in which they lived. What do these examples have in common? They all have to do with discrimination in one form or the other. In each case, members of one community are targeted and victimized on account of their religious identity. In other words, basic freedoms of a set of citizens are denied. Some might even say that these incidents are instances of religious persecution and they reflect interreligious domination. Secularism is first and foremost a doctrine that opposes all such forms of interreligious domination. This is, however, only one crucial aspect of the concept of secularism. An equally important dimension of secularism is its opposition to intra-religious domination. Let us get deeper into this issue. Intra-religious domination. Some people believe that religion is merely the opium of the masses and that, one day, when the basic needs of all are fulfilled and they lead a happy and contented life, religion will disappear. Such a view comes from an exaggerated sense of human potential. It is unlikely that human beings will ever be able to fully know the world and control it. We may be able to prolong our life but will never become immortal. Disease can never be entirely eliminated, nor can we get rid of an element of accident and luck from our lives. Separation and loss are endemic to the human condition. While a large part of our suffering is man-made and hence eliminable, at least some of our suffering is not made by man. Religion, art and philosophy are responses to such sufferings. Secularism too accepts this and therefore it is not anti-religious. However, religion has its share of some deep-rooted problems. For example, one can hardly think of a religion that treats its male and female members on an equal footing. In religions such as Hinduism, some sections have faced persistent discrimination. For example, Dalits have been barred from entering Hindu temples. In some parts of the country, Hindu women cannot enter temples. When religion is organized, it is frequently taken over by its most conservative faction, which does not tolerate any dissent. Religious fundamentalism in parts of the US has become a big problem and endangers peace both within the country and outside. Many religions fragment into sects, which leads to frequent sectarian violence and persecution of dissenting minorities. Thus, religious domination cannot be identified only with interreligious domination. It takes another conspicuous form, namely, intra-religious domination. As secularism is opposed to all forms of institutionalized religious domination, it challenges not merely interreligious but also intra-religious domination. We now possess a general idea of it is a normative doctrine which seeks to realize a secular society, i.e., one devoid of either interreligious or intra-religious domination. Put positively, it promotes freedom within religions, and equality between, as well as within, religions. Within this larger framework, let us now consider a narrower and more specific question, namely, what kind of state is necessary to realize these goals? In other words, let us consider how a state committed to the ideal of secularism should relate to religion and religious communities. 8.2 Secular State. Perhaps one way of preventing religious discrimination is to work together for mutual enlightenment. Education is one way of helping to change the mindset of people. Individual examples of sharing and mutual help can also contribute towards reducing prejudice and suspicion between communities. It is always inspiring to read stories of Hindus saving Muslims or Muslims saving Hindus in their midst of a deadly communal riot. But it is unlikely that mere education or the goodness of some persons will eliminate religious discrimination. In modern societies, states have enormous public power. How they function is bound to make a crucial difference to the outcome of any struggle to create a society less ridden with inter-community conflict and religious discrimination. For this reason, we need to see what kind of state is needed to prevent religious conflict and to promote religious harmony. How should a state prevent domination by any religious group? For a start, a state must not be run by the heads of any particular religion. A state governed directly by a priestly order is called theocratic. Theocratic states, such as the Papal States of Europe in medieval times or in recent times the Taliban-controlled states, lacking separation between religious and political institutions, are known for their hierarchies, and oppressions, and reluctance to allow freedom of religion to members of other religious groups. If we value peace, freedom and equality, religious institutions and state institutions must be separated. Some people think that the separation of state and religion is sufficient for the existence of a secular state. This does not appear be so. Many states which are non-theocratic continue to have a close alliance with a particular religion. For example, the state in England in the 16th century was not run by a priestly class but clearly favoured the Anglican Church and its members. England had an established Anglican religion, which was the official religion of the state. Today Pakistan has an official state religion, namely Sunni Islam. Such regimes may leave little scope for internal dissent or religious equality. To be truly secular, a state must not only refuse to be theocratic but also have no formal, legal alliance with any religion. The separation of religion and state is however a necessary but not a sufficient ingredient of a secular state. A secular state must be committed to principles and goals which are at least partly derived from non-religious sources. These ends should include peace, religious freedom, freedom from religiously grounded oppressions, discrimination and exclusions, as also interreligious and intra-religious equality. To promote these ends, the state must be separated from organized religion and its institutions for the sake of some of these values. However, there is no reason to suggest that this separation should take a particular form. In fact, the nature and extent of separation may take different forms, depending upon the specific values it is meant to promote and the way in which these values are spelt out. We will now consider two such conceptions, the mainstream Western conception best represented by the American state, and an alternative conception best exemplified by the Indian state. The Western model of secularism. All secular states have one thing in common: they are neither theocratic nor do they establish a religion. However, in most commonly prevalent conceptions, inspired mainly by the American model, separation of religion and state is understood as mutual exclusion. The state will not intervene in the affairs of religion and, in the same manner, religion will not interfere in the affairs of the state. Each has a separate sphere of its own with independent jurisdiction. No policy of the state can have an exclusively religious rationale. No religious classification can be the basis of any public policy. If this happened, there is illegitimate intrusion of religion in the state. Similarly, the state cannot aid any religious institution. It cannot give financial support to educational institutions run by religious communities. Nor can it hinder the activities of religious communities, as long as they are within the broad limits set by the law of the land. For example, if a religious institution forbids a woman from becoming a priest, then the state can do little about it. If a religious community excommunicates its dissenters, the state can only be a silent witness. If a particular religion forbids the entry of some of its members in the sanctum of its temple, then the state has no option but to let the matter rest exactly where it is. On this view, religion is a private matter, not a matter of state policy or law. This common conception interprets freedom and equality in an individualist manner. Liberty is the liberty of individuals. Equality is equality between individuals. There is no scope for the idea that a community has the liberty to follow practices of its own choosing. There is little scope for community-based rights or minority rights. The history of Western societies tells us why this is so. Except for the presence of the Jews, most Western societies were marked by a great deal of religious homogeneity. Given this fact, they naturally focused on intra-religious domination. While strict separation of the state from the church is emphasized to realize, among other things, individual freedom, issues of interreligious, and therefore of minority rights, equality are often neglected. Finally, this form of mainstream secularism has no place for the idea of state-supported religious reform. This feature follows directly from its understanding that the separation of state from church, religion entails a relationship of mutual exclusion. 8.4. The Indian model of secularism. Sometimes it is said that Indian secularism is an imitation of Western secularism. But a careful reading of our Constitution shows that this is not the case. Indian secularism is fundamentally different from Western. Indian secularism does not focus only on church-state separation, and the idea of interreligious equality is crucial to the Indian conception. Let us elaborate this further. What makes Indian secularism distinctive? For a start, it arose in the context of deep religious diversity that predated the advent of Western modern ideas and nationalism. There was already a culture of interreligious tolerance in India. However, we must not forget that tolerance is compatible with religious domination. It may allow some space to everyone, but such freedom is usually limited. Besides, tolerance allows you to put up with people whom you find deeply repugnant. This is a great virtue if a society is recovering from a major civil war, but not in times of peace where people are struggling for equal dignity and respect. The advent of Western modernity brought to the fore hitherto neglected and marginalized notions of equality in Indian thought. It sharpened these ideas and helped us to focus on equality within the community. It also ushered ideas of inter-community equality to replace the notion of hierarchy. Thus, Indian secularism took on a distinct form as a result of an interaction between what already existed in a society that had religious diversity and the ideas that came from the West. It resulted in equal focus on intra-religious and interreligious domination. Indian secularism equally opposed their. Connected to it is the second difference. Indian secularism deals not only with religious freedom of individuals but also with religious freedom of minority communities. Within it, an individual has the right to profess the religion of his or her choice. Likewise, religious minorities also have a right to exist and to maintain their own culture and educational institutions. A third difference is this. Since a secular state must be concerned equally with intra-religious domination, Indian secularism has made room for and is compatible with the idea of state-supported religious reform. Thus, the Indian constitution bans untouchability. The Indian state has enacted several laws abolishing child marriage and lifting the taboo on intercaste marriage sanctioned by Hinduism. The question, however, that arises is, can a state initiate or even support religious reforms and yet be secular? Can a state claim to be secular and not maintain separation of religion from state? The secular character of the Indian state is established by virtue of the fact that it is neither theocratic nor has it established any one or multiple religions. Beyond that, it has adopted a very sophisticated policy in pursuit of religious equality. This allows it either to disengage with religion in American style, or engage with it if required. The Indian state may engage with religion negatively to oppose religious tyranny. This is reflected in such actions as the ban on untouchability. It may also choose a positive mode of engagement. Thus, the Indian Constitution grants all religious minorities the right to establish and maintain their own educational institutions which may receive assistance from the state. All these complex strategies can be adopted by the state to promote the values of peace, freedom and equality. (119) It should be clear by now why the complexity of Indian secularism cannot be captured by the phrase, equal respect for all religions. If by this phrase is meant peaceful coexistence of all religions or interreligious toleration, then this will not be enough because secularism is much more than mere peaceful coexistence or toleration. If this phrase mean equal feeling of respect towards all established religions and their practices, then there is an ambiguity that needs clearing. Indian secularism allows for principled state intervention in all religions. Such intervention betrays disrespect to some aspects of every religion. For example, religiously sanctioned caste hierarchies are not acceptable within Indian secularism. The secular state does not have to treat every aspect of every religion with equal respect. It allows equal disrespect for some aspects of organized religions. 8.5 Criticisms of Indian secularism. Indian secularism has been subjected to fierce criticism. What are these? Can we defend secularism from them? Anti-religious. First, it is often argued that secularism is anti-religious. We hope to have shown that secularism is against institutionalized religious domination. This is not the same as being anti-religious. Similarly, it has been argued by some that secularism threatens religious identity. However, as we noted earlier, secularism promotes religious freedom and equality. Hence, it clearly protects religious identity rather than threatens it. Of course, it does undermine some forms of religious identity, those which are dogmatic, violent, fanatical, exclusivist, and those which foster hatred of other religions. The real question is whether or not something is undermined, but whether what is undermined is intrinsically worthy or unworthy. Western import. A second criticism is that secularism is linked to Christianity, that it is Western and therefore unsuited to Indian conditions. On the surface, this is a strange complaint. For there are millions of things in India today, from trousers to the internet and parliamentary democracy, that have their origins in the West. One response, therefore, could be, so what? Have you heard a European complain that because zero was invented in India, they will not work with it? However, this is a somewhat shallow response. The more important and relevant point is that for a state to be truly secular, it must have ends of its own. Western states became secular when, at an important level, they challenged the control of established religious authority over social and political life. The Western model of secularism is not therefore a product of the Christian world. What of the claim that it is Western? The mutual exclusion of religion and state, which is supposed to be the ideal of Western secular societies, is also not the defining feature of all secular states. The idea of separation can be interpreted differently by different societies. A secular state may keep a principled distance from religion to promote peace between communities, and it may also intervene to protect the rights of specific communities. This exactly is what has happened in India. India evolved a variant of secularism that is not just an implant from the West on Indian soil. The fact is that the secularism has both Western and non-Western origins. In the West, it was the church-state separation which was central, and in countries such as India, the ideas of peaceful coexistence of different religious communities has been important. Minoritism. A third accusation against secularism is the charge of minoritism. It is true that Indian secularism advocates minority rights, so the question is this justified? Consider 4 adults in a compartment. A train traveling at the fastest speed imaginable. In the middle of the journey, one of the 4 passengers expresses a desire to smoke. The second one complains that he cannot bear cigarette smoke. The other 2 passengers smoke too but say nothing. Clearly there is a conflict here between 2 passengers. A suggestion is made that it be resolved by vote. The 2 mild smokers go along with the addict, and the non-smoker is defeated by a margin of 2 votes. The person in the minority loses, but the result appears fair because a proper democratic procedure adopted by common agreement was followed. Now alter the situation a bit. Suppose that the non-smoker suffers from asthma. Smoking can induce a life-threatening attack in him. His preference that the other person does not smoke expresses now his fundamental and very urgent interest. Would the procedure previously followed, of going with the decision of the majority, be fair in such a context? Do you not think that the addicted smoker should refrain till the train reaches its destination? You will agree that when it comes to fundamental interests, voting as a democratic procedure is inappropriate. A person has a prior right to the satisfaction of his or her significant interests. What holds true of individuals also holds for communities. The most fundamental interest of minorities must not be harmed and must be protected by constitutional law. This is exactly how it is in the Indian constitution. Minority rights are justified as long as these rights protect their fundamental interests. At this point someone might still say that minority rights are special privileges which come with some costs to others. Why then should such special privilege be given? This question can be best answered by another example. Consider that a film is being shown in an auditorium on the first floor. The auditorium is accessible by a staircase. Everyone is free to buy a ticket, go up the stairs and see the film. Are they? Is everyone really free? Suppose that among avid film goers are some old people, some who have recently broken a leg and others who have long been physically challenged. None of them can really climb up the stairs. Do you think it would be wrong if a lift or a ramp was provided for people in wheelchairs? Doing so enables them to achieve exactly what others routinely procure through the staircase. Yet, this group in minority needs a different mode of getting to the first floor. If all spaces are structured in such a way that they suit only young, able-bodied persons, then some category of persons will forever be excluded from a simple benefit such as watching a film. To make a separate arrangement for them is not to accord them any special treatment. It is to treat them with the same respect and dignity with which all others are being treated. The lesson is that minority rights need not be nor should be viewed as special privileges. Interventionist. A fourth criticism claims that secularism is coercive and that it interferes excessively with the religious freedom of communities. This misreads Indian secularism. It is true that by rejecting the idea of separation as mutual exclusion, Indian secularism rejects non-interference in religion. But it does not follow that it is excessively interventionist. Indian secularism follows the concept of principled distance, which also allows for non-interference. Besides, interference need not automatically mean coercive intervention. It is of course true that Indian secularism permits state-supported religious reform. But this should not be equated with a change imposed from above, with coercive intervention. But it might be argued, does it do this consistently? Why have personal laws of all religious communities not been reformed? This is the big dilemma facing the Indian state. A secularist might see the personal laws concerning marriage, inheritance and other family matters which are governed by different religions, as manifestations of community-specific rights that are protected by the Constitution. He might see these laws as an affront to the basic principles of secularism on the ground that they treat women unequally and therefore unjustly. Personal laws can be seen as manifestations of freedom from interreligious domination or as instances of intra-religious domination. Such internal conflicts are part and parcel of any complex doctrine, but they are not something that we need to live with forever. Personal laws can be reformed in such a way that they continue to exemplify both minority rights and equality between men and women. But such reform should neither be brought about by state or group coercion, nor should the state adopt a policy of total distance from it. The state must act as a facilitator by supporting liberal and democratic voices within every religion. Vote bank politics. Fifth, there is the argument that secularism encourages the politics of vote banks. As an empirical claim, this is not entirely false. However, we need to put this issue in perspective. First, in a democracy, politicians are bound to seek votes. That is part of their job, and that is what democratic politics is largely about. To blame a politician for pursuing a group of people or promising to initiate a policy with the motivation to secure their votes is unfair. The real question is what precisely the voters sought for. Is it to promote solely his self-interest or power, or is it also for the welfare of the group in question? If the group which voted for the politician does not get any benefit from this act, then surely the politician must be blamed. If secular politicians who sought the votes of minorities also manage to give them what they want, then this is a success of the secular project which aims, after all, to also protect the interests of the minorities. But what if the welfare of the group in question is sought at the cost of the welfare and rights of other groups? What if the interests of the majority are undermined by these secular politicians? Then a new injustice is born. But can you think of such examples? Not one or two, but a whole lot of them, such that you can claim that the whole system is skewed in favor of minorities. If you think hard, you might find that there is little evidence that this has happened in India. In short, there is nothing wrong with vote bank politics as such, but only with a form of vote bank politics that generates injustice. The mere fact that secular parties utilize vote banks is not troublesome. All parties do so in relation to some social group. Impossible project. A final, cynical criticism might be this: secularism cannot work because it tries to do too much, to find a solution to an intractable problem. What is this problem? People with deep religious differences will never live together in peace. Now, this is an empirically false claim. The history of Indian civilization shows that this kind of living together is realizable. It was realized elsewhere too. The Ottoman Empire is a stirring example. But now critics might say that coexistence under conditions of inequality was indeed possible. Everyone could find a place in a hierarchically arranged order. The point, they claim, is that this will not work today when equality is increasingly becoming a dominant cultural value. There is another way of responding to this criticism. Far from pursuing an impossible objective, Indian secularism mirrors the future of the world. A great experiment is being carried out in India, watched with razor-sharp eyes and with great interest by the whole world. It is doing so because with the migration of people from the former colonies to the West, and the increased movement of people across the globe with the intensification of globalization, Europe and America and some parts of the Middle East are beginning to resemble India in the diversity of cultures and religions which are present in their societies. These societies are watching the future of the Indian experiment with keen interest. Read out the list of gazetted holidays in India. Does it uphold the case of secularism in India? Give your arguments. Name of the holiday date according to Gregorian calendar: 1. Id-ul-Zuha, Bakrid. 11th. January 2nd. Republic Day. 26th. January 3rd. Muharram. 09th. February 4th. Holi. 15th. March 5th. Ram Navami. 06th. April 6th. Mahavir Jayanti. 11th. April 7th. Miladunabai, birthday of. 11th. April Prophet Muhammad, 8. Good Friday. 14th. April 9th. Buddha Purnima. 13th. May 10th. Independence Day. 15th. August 11th. Janmashtami. 16th. August 12th. Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. 2nd October 13th. Dussehra, Vijaya Dashami. 2nd October 14th. Diwali, Deepawali. 21st October 15th. Eid al-Fitr. 25th October 16. Guru Nanak's birthday. 05th November 17th. Christmas Day. 25th December. Kemal Ataturk. S. Secularism. Let us look at a very different kind of secularism practiced in Turkey in the first half of the 20th century. This secularism was not about principled distance from organized religion, instead it involved active intervention in and suppression of religion. This version of secularism was propounded and practiced by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He came to power after the First War. He was determined to put an end to the institution of Khalifa in the public life of Turkey. Ataturk was convinced that only a clear break with traditional thinking and expressions could elevate Turkey from the sorry state it was in. He set out in an aggressive manner to modernize and secularize Turkey. Ataturk changed his own name from Mustafa Kemal Pasha to Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk translates as Father of the Turks. The fez, a traditional cap worn by Muslims, was banned by the hat law. Western clothing was encouraged for men and women. The Western, Gregorian, calendar replaced the traditional Turkish calendar. In 1928, the new Turkish alphabet, in a modified Latin form, was adopted. Can you imagine a secularism that does not give you the freedom to keep the name you are identified with, wear the dress you are used to, change the language you communicate in? In what ways do you think Ataturk's secularism is different from Indian secularism? Nehru on secularism. Equal protection by the state to all religions. This is how Nehru responded when a student asked him to spell out what secularism meant in independent India. He wanted a secular state to be one that protects all religions, but does not favor one at the expense of others and does not itself adopt any religion as the state religion. Nehru was the philosopher of Indian secularism. Nehru did not practice any religion, nor did he believe in God. But for him secularism did not mean hostility to religion. In that sense Nehru was very different from Ataturk in Turkey. At the same time Nehru was not in favor of a complete separation between religion and state. A secular state can interfere in matters of religion to bring about social reform. Nehru himself played a key role in enacting laws abolishing caste discrimination, dowry and sati, and extending legal rights and social freedom to Indian women. While Nehru was prepared to be flexible on many counts, there was one thing on which he was always firm and uncompromising. Secularism for him meant a complete opposition to communalism of all kinds. Nehru was particularly severe in his criticism of the communalism of the majority community, which posed a threat to national unity. Secularism for him was not only a matter of principles, it was also the only guarantee of the unity and integrity of India. Chapter 9. Peace. Overview. The screaming media reports on wars, terrorist attacks and riots constantly remind us that we live in turbulent times. While actual peace remains elusive, the word itself seems to have become quite popular. It springs readily to the lips of politicians, journalists, industrialists, educators and army chiefs. It is also cited as a cherished value in a wide variety of documents including textbooks, constitutions, charters and treaties. As the idea of peace is readily invoked and the desirability of pursuing peace is rarely questioned, we may think that the meaning of this concept needs no further clarification. However, this is not the case. As we will see later, the seeming consensus around the idea of peace is a relatively recent phenomenon. Over the years, the meaning and value of peace has been assessed fairly differently. The advocates of peace face many questions. What exactly is peace? And why is it so fragile in today's world? What can be done to establish peace? Can we use violence to establish peace? What are the main reasons for the growing violence in our society? These are questions that we will examine in greater detail in this chapter. Peace. 9.1 Introduction. Like democracy, justice, and human rights, peace has become a buzzword. But we must remember that this seeming consensus on the desirability of peace is relatively recent. Many important thinkers of the past wrote about peace in negative terms. The 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was one of those who glorified war. Nietzsche did not value peace because he believed that only conflict could facilitate the growth of civilization. Several other thinkers have similarly condemned peace and commended strife as a vehicle of individual heroism and social vitality. The Italian social theorist, Vilfredo Pareto (1848–1923), argued that people who were able and willing to use force to achieve their goals constituted the governing elites in most societies. He described themos, lions. This is not to suggest that the cause of peace had no champions. In fact, it occupied a central place in the original teachings of almost all religions. The modern era too has witnessed ardent advocates of peace, both in the spiritual and secular domains. Mahatma Gandhi would figure prominently among them. However, the contemporary preoccupation with peace can be traced to the atrocities of the 20th century, which resulted in the death of millions of human beings. You may have read about some of these events in your history textbooks: the rise of fascism, Nazism and the World Wars. Closer home in India and Pakistan we have experienced the horrors of partition. Many of the aforesaid calamities involved the use of advanced technology to wreak havoc on an unprecedented scale. Thus, Germany carpet-bombed London during the Second World War, and the British responded by sending 1,000 bomber raids to attack German cities. The war ended with the USA dropping atom bombs on the Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At least 20,000 people died immediately from the two attacks and many more died later due to the effects of nuclear radiation. Nearly 95% of the casualties were civilians. The post-war decades were marked by intense rivalry between two superpowers, the capitalist USA and the communist USSR, for world supremacy. Since nuclear weapons had become the new currency of power, both countries began to make and stockpile them on a large scale. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 was a particularly dark episode in this unfolding military competition. It began when American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in neighboring Cuba. The USA responded by organizing a naval blockade of Cuba and threatening military action against the USSR if the missiles were not removed. This eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation ended when the Soviet Union withdrew the missiles. During the 2 weeks it lasted, the crisis had brought humanity perilously close to the brink of total destruction. So, if people praise peace today, that is not merely because they believe it to be a good idea. Humanity has learned to value peace after paying a huge price for its absence. The specter of tragic conflict continues to haunt us. Today life is more insecure than ever before as people everywhere face a growing threat from terrorism. Peace continues to be valuable, partly because dangers to it are ever present. There. Meaning of peace. Peace is often defined as the absence of war. The definition is simple but misleading. This is because war is usually equated with armed conflict between countries. However, what happened in Rwanda or Bosnia was not a war of this kind. Yet, it represented a violation, a cessation of peace. While every war leads to absence of peace, every absence of peace need not take the form of war. The second step in defining peace would be to see it as absence of violent conflict of all kinds, including war, riot, massacre, assassination, or simply physical attack. This definition is clearly better than the earlier one. Yet, it does not take us very far. Violence is often rooted in the very structure of society. Social institutions and practices that reinforce entrenched inequalities of caste, class and gender can also cause injury in subtle and invisible ways. If any challenge is made to these hierarchies by oppressed classes, it may also breed conflict and violence. Structural violence of this kind may produce large-scale evil consequences. Let us look at a few concrete instances of such violence arising from caste hierarchy, class disparity, patriarchy, colonialism, and racism, communalism. Forms of structural violence. The traditional caste system treated certain groups of people as aspryshya or untouchable. Till it was outlawed by the Constitution of Independent India, the practice of untouchability subjected them to social exclusion and deprivation of the worst sort. The country is still struggling to erase the scars and relics of this ugly custom. While a social order based on class appears to be more flexible, it too generates a great deal of inequality and oppression. In the developing countries, a majority of the laboring classes are confined to the informal sector where the wages and conditions of work are abysmal. A sizable underclass exists even in the developed countries. Patriarchy entails a form of social organization that results in the systematic subordination of, and discrimination against, women. Its manifestations include selective abortion of female fetuses, denial of adequate nourishment and education to the girl child, child marriage, wife battering, dowry-related crimes, sexual harassment at the workplace, rape, and honor killing. The low sex ratio, 933 females per 1,000 males, in India is a poignant index of the ravages of patriarchy. Colonialism in the sense of prolonged and direct subjection of a people to alien rule is now a rare phenomenon. But the ongoing Palestinian struggle against Israeli domination shows that it has not disappeared completely. Besides, the former colonies of European imperialist countries are yet to recover completely from the forms of manifold exploitation they suffered during the colonial era. Racism and communalism involve the stigmatization and oppression of an entire racial group or community. Though the notion that humanity can be divided into distinct races is scientifically spurious, it has been used to justify insidious practices such as Negro slavery in the United States of America, until 1865, the slaughter of Jews in Hitler's Germany, and apartheid, a policy followed until 1992 by the white-controlled government in South Africa, which treated the majority black people of the country as second-class citizens. Racial discrimination still continues covertly in the West and is now often directed against immigrants from countries in Asia, Africa and Latin America. Communalism may be seen as the South Asian counterpart of racism, where the victims tend to be minority religious groups. The psychological and tangible harm suffered by the victims of violence often creates grievances that persist over generations. Sometimes they may give rise to fresh bouts of conflict when provoked by some incident or even remark. We have examples of long-term grievances being harbored by communities against each other in South Asia, such as those stemming from the violence unleashed during the partition of British India in 1947. A just and lasting peace can be attained only by articulating and removing the latent grievances and causes of conflict through a process of dialogue. Hence the ongoing attempts to resolve problems between India and Pakistan also include promoting increased contacts among people in all walks of life. Let's think. Which of the following views do you agree with and why? All wrongdoing arises because of mind. If mind is transformed, can wrongdoing remain? Gautam Buddha, I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary, the evil it does is permanent. Mahatma Gandhi, ye shall be those whose eyes ever seek for an enemy, ye shall love peace as a means to new wars, and the short peace more than the long. You I advise not to work, but to victory. Let your work be a fight, let your peace be a victory. Friedrich Nietzsche. Eliminating violence. The Constitution of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization rightly observes, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Several age-old spiritual principles, e.g., compassion, and practices, e.g., meditation, are geared precisely to the facilitation of such an endeavor. Modern healing techniques and therapies like psychoanalysis can perform a similar function. However, we have noted that violence does not originate merely within the individual psyche, it is also rooted in certain social structures. The elimination of structural violence necessitates the creation of a just and democratic society. Peace, understood as the harmonious coexistence of contented people, would be a product of such a society. It can never be achieved once and for all. Peace is not an end state, but a process involving an active pursuit of the moral and material resources needed to establish human welfare in the broadest sense of the term. 9.3 Can violence ever promote peace? It has often been asserted that violence, though it is an evil, can sometimes be a necessary prelude to bringing about peace. It may be argued that tyrants and oppressors can be prevented from continuing to harm the populace only by being forcibly removed. The liberation struggles of oppressed people can be justified even though they may use some violence. But resort to violence, however well-meaning, could turn out to be self-defeating. Once deployed, it tends to spin out of control, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. It is for this reason that pacifists, who consider peace to be a supreme value, take a moral stand against the use of violence even for attaining just ends. They too recognize the need to fight oppression. However, they advocate the mobilization of love and truth to win the hearts and minds of the oppressors. This is not to underestimate the potential of militant but non-violent form of resistance. Civil disobedience is a major mode of such struggle and it has been successfully used to make a dent in structures of oppression, a prominent instance being Gandhi's deployment of Satyagraha during the Indian freedom movement. Gandhi took his stand on justice and appealed to the conscience of the British rulers. If that did not work, he put moral and political pressure on them by launching a mass movement involving open but non-violent breaking of the unjust laws. Drawing inspiration from him, Martin Luther King waged a similar battle in the 1960s against anti-black racial discrimination in the USA. Let's think. The Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia was a particularly horrific example of the counterproductive nature of revolutionary violence. An outcome of the insurrection led by Pol Pot, the regime sought to institute a communist order geared to the liberation of the oppressed peasantry. During 1975 to 1979, it let loose a reign of terror that caused the death of approximately 1.7 million people, 21% of the country's population. This was one of the bleakest human tragedies of the previous century. The systematic deployment of violence by radical movements to attain apparently desirable objectives may not always have such dramatically appalling consequences. But in the process, it frequently assumes an institutional form, thereby becoming an integral part of the resulting political order. A case in point is the FLN, National Liberation Front, which led the Algerian independence movement by using violent means. While it liberated the country from the yoke of French imperialism in 1962, the FLN regime soon degenerated into authoritarianism and triggered a backlash in the form of Islamic fundamentalism. Mahatma Gandhi on nonviolence. You may have heard the phrase, Majburi Ka Naam Mahatma Gandhi. The tendency to equate helplessness with nonviolence and nonviolence with Gandhi has led some people to say this. Underlying this light remark is the widespread view that nonviolence is the way of the weak. Gandhi rejected this understanding of nonviolence and articulated an altogether different philosophy of nonviolence. We usually understand nonviolence to mean non-injury. A nonviolent act is thought to be one that does not cause physical injury. Gandhi changed this meaning in two fundamental ways. For him, nonviolence meant not just refraining from causing physical harm, mental harm, or loss of livelihood. It also meant giving up even the thought of harming someone. For him, causing did not mean doing the harm oneself. For Gandhi, I would be guilty of violence if I helped someone in harming someone else or if I benefited from a harmful act. In this sense, Gandhi's notion of violence was close to structural violence. The second major change that Gandhi introduced was to give the idea of nonviolence a positive meaning. Not causing harm was not enough. Ahimsa required an element of conscious compassion. Gandhi was opposed to passive spiritualism. For him, nonviolence meant a positive and active pursuit of well-being and goodness. Therefore, those who practice nonviolence must exercise physical and mental restraint under the gravest provocation. Nonviolence is an extremely active force that has no room for cowardice or weakness. Gandhi in fact went to the extent of stating that if nonviolence were inadequate to defend oneself, then it would be better to resort to violence than take refuge in passivity in the name of nonviolence. Some Gandhians say that the popular saying cited at the outset should be changed to, Majburi Ka Naam Mahatma Gandhi. 9.4 Peace and the State. It is often argued that the division of world into separate sovereign states is an impediment to the pursuit of peace. As each state sees itself as an independent and supreme entity, it tends to protect its own perceived self-interest. While the pursuit of peace requires that we see ourselves as part of the larger humanity, states tend to make distinctions between people. To pursue the interest of their citizens, they are willing to inflict injury upon others. Besides, in today's world each state has consolidated instruments of coercion and force. While the state was expected to use its force, its army or its police, to protect its citizens, in practice these forces could be deployed against its own members to suppress dissent. This is most clearly evident in authoritarian regimes and military dictatorships, like the one currently ruling Myanmar. The long-term solution to such problems lies in making the state more accountable through meaningful democratization and reining it in via an effective system of civil liberties. This is the route taken by the post-apartheid regime in South Africa, which is one of the prominent political success stories of recent years. The struggle for democracy and human rights is thus closely linked to the safeguarding of peace. 9.5 Different approaches to the pursuit of peace. Different strategies have been used for the pursuit and maintenance of peace. These have been shaped by three distinct approaches. The first approach accords centrality to states, respects their sovereignty, and treats competition among them as a fact of life. Its main concern is with the proper management of this competition, and with the containment of possible conflict through interstate arrangements like balance of power. Such a balance is said to have prevailed in the 19th century when the major European countries fine-tuned their struggle for power by forming alliances that deterred potential aggressors and prevented the outbreak of a large-scale war. The second approach too grants the deep-rooted nature of interstate rivalry. But it stresses the positive presence and possibilities of interdependence. It underscores the growing social and economic cooperation among nations. Such cooperation is expected to temper state sovereignty and promote international understanding. Consequently, global conflict would be reduced, leading to better prospects of peace. An example frequently cited by advocates of this approach is that of post-World War Europe, which secured durable peace by graduating from economic integration to political unification. Unlike the first two approaches, the third considers the state system to be a passing phase of human history. It envisages the emergence of a supranational order and sees the fostering of a global community as the surest guarantee of peace. The seeds of such a community are found in the expanding interactions and coalitions across state boundaries that involve diverse non-governmental actors like multinational corporations and people's movements. The proponents of this approach argue that ongoing process of globalization is further eroding the already diminished primacy and sovereignty of the state, thereby creating conditions conducive to the establishment of world peace. The United Nations may be said to embody elements of all the three approaches. The Security Council, which gives permanent membership and veto power, the right to shoot down a proposal even if it's supported by other members, to 5 dominant states, reflects the prevalent international hierarchy. The Economic and Social Council promotes interstate cooperation in several spheres. The Commission on Human Rights seeks to shape and apply transnational norms. Pacifism. Pacifism preaches opposition to war or violence as a means of settling disputes. It covers a spectrum of views ranging from a preference for diplomacy in resolving international disputes to absolute opposition to the use of violence, or even force, in any circumstance. Pacifism may be based on principle or pragmatism. Principled pacifism springs from the belief that war, deliberate lethal force, violence or any form of coercion is morally wrong. Pragmatic pacifism does not adhere to such an absolute principle but holds that there are better ways of resolving a dispute than war, or considers the benefits of a war to be outweighed by the costs. Dovish, are informal terms used to describe people who seek to avoid war. The terms allude to the placid nature of the dove. Some people termed dovish would not view their position as pacifist, for they would consider war to be justifiable in some circumstances. The opposite of a dove is a hawk, or a warmonger. Some pacifists, while opposing war, are not opposed to all use of coercion, physical force against people or destruction of property. Antimilitarists, for example, are specifically opposed to the modern nation-state's military institutions rather than to violence in general. Other pacifists follow principles of nonviolence, believing that only nonviolent action is acceptable. (9.6) Contemporary. Challenges. While the UN has several noteworthy achievements to its credit, it has not succeeded in preventing and eliminating threats to peace. Instead, dominant states have asserted their sovereignty and sought to shape regional power structures and the international system itself in keeping with their own perceptions and priorities. To this end, they have even resorted to direct military action against an occupation of foreign territories. The recent US intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq is a glaring example of such conduct. Numerous lives have been lost in the ensuing warfare. The rise of terrorism is partly a response to the self-serving and ham-handed conduct of the aggressive states. Terrorists currently pose a great threat to peace through an adroit and ruthless use of modern weapons and advanced technology more generally. The demolition of the World Trade Center, New York, USA, by Islamic militants on the 9th of September 2001 was a striking manifestation of this sinister reality. The use of biological, chemical, nuclear weapons of mass destruction by these forces remains a frightening possibility. The global community has failed to curb the rapacity of the domineering powers and the guerrilla tactics of the terrorists. It has also often served as a mute spectator of genocide, the systematic massacre of an entire group of people. This became particularly evident in Rwanda, an African country that witnessed the murder of nearly 500,000 Tutsis by Hutus during 1994. Despite the availability of intelligence before the killing began and subsequent international media coverage of the genocide as it unfolded, there was no international intervention. The UN refused to authorize its peacekeeping operation in Rwanda to stop the carnage. All this is not to say that peace is a lost cause. After World War I, countries like Japan and Costa Rica decided not to maintain military forces. Several parts of the world have witnessed the creation of nuclear weapons-free zones where the use, development or deployment of nuclear weapons is banned through an internationally recognized treaty. Today there are 6 such zones which have been achieved or are in the process of acceptance, covering the Antarctic territory, Latin America and the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, Africa, the South Pacific, and Mongolia. The disintegration of the USSR in 1991 put a full stop to the era of military, especially nuclear, rivalry between superpowers and removed a major threat to international security. Besides, the contemporary era has witnessed the rise of numerous popular initiatives aimed at fostering peace. These are often collectively described as the peace movement. The devastation caused by World War I galvanized the movement. It has since gathered momentum and gained a large following across geographical and political barriers. The movement is sustained by people from diverse walks of life and includes workers, writers, scientists, teachers, media persons, priests and statesmen. It has expanded and achieved depth by forging mutually beneficial linkages with other movements such as those championing the empowerment of women and protection of the environment. The movement has also created a body of knowledge called peace studies and effectively used new channels of communication such as the Internet. In this chapter we have examined various dimensions of peace, its meaning, the intellectual and practical challenges it faces, as also its prospects. We have seen that the pursuit of peace involves a constant effort to create and sustain harmonious social relations conducive to human well-being and flourishing. The pathway to peace can be blocked by many obstacles ranging from injustice to imperialism. But the temptation to remove them by using indiscriminate violence is both unethical and extremely risky. In an era of genocide, terrorism and total war which blurs the line between civilians and combatants, the quest for peace must inform both the means and ends of political action. A poignant dilemma arises from the tendency of many states to use violent means for achieving their objectives in the international arena, especially for capturing territory and natural resources. The resulting contention can escalate into a full-scale war. Thus, in 1990, Iraq invaded its small, oil-rich neighbor Kuwait. It justified the war by asserting that Kuwaiti territory had been an Iraqi province arbitrarily cut off by imperialism, and by accusing Kuwait of slant drilling into Iraq's oil supplies. The invasion was eventually repulsed by a US-led military coalition. Conflict of this kind is an ever-present possibility in a global system devoid of an effective world government. It is also exacerbated by vested interests like the armament industry, which find war a profitable proposition. Chapter 10. Development. Overview. In this chapter, we will start with the common understanding of development and the problems presented by this understanding. In the later sections we will explore the ways in which these problems can be addressed and discuss some alternative ways of thinking about development. After going through this chapter you should be able to explain the meaning of the term development. Discuss the achievements and problems of existing models of development. Discuss some of the alternative models of development which have been put forward. Introduction. Suppose in a school each class brings out an annual class magazine as one of their extracurricular activities. In one class, the teacher takes the last year's magazine as a model, makes a plan of what this year's magazine should contain in terms of topics, articles, poetry, etc. And then divides and assigns topics to different students. It is possible that as a result a student interested in cricket may find that she has been allotted a different topic and the one who has been allotted cricket is actually keen to write a play. It is also possible that in this scheme 3 students may want to get together to work out a series of cartoons but find that they have been placed in different groups. In another class, however, the content of the magazine is debated by the students. There are many disagreements but eventually a plan for a magazine emerges about which all are in agreement. In your opinion, which class will come up with a magazine in which the students get to realize their particular interests in the best possible manner? The first may produce a good-looking magazine, but will the content be engrossing? Will the person who wants to write on cricket, write with equal passion on her assigned topic? Which magazine will be seen as unique and which as standard? Which class will feel that working on the magazine was interesting and which class will do it as just routine homework? For a society, deciding about what constitutes development is a bit like students deciding about what kind of school magazine they want and how they should work on it. We could mechanically follow a model which has been previously used in our own, or other countries, or we could plan keeping in mind the good of the society as a whole as well as the rights of those people whose lives may be directly affected by development projects. The leaders can either concentrate on implementing plans regardless of protests or they can proceed democratically, carrying the people with them. In the broadest sense of the term, development conveys the ideas of improvement, progress, well-being and an aspiration for a better life. Through its notion of development, a society articulates what constitutes its vision for the society as a whole and how best to achieve it. However, the term development is also often used in a narrower sense to refer to more limited goals such as increasing the rate of economic growth, or modernizing the society. Development has unfortunately often come to be identified with achieving preset targets, or completing projects like dams, or factories, hospitals, rather than with realizing the broader vision of development which the society upholds. In the process, some sections of society may have benefited while others may have had to suffer loss of their homes, or lands, or way of life, without any compensatory gains. Issues such as whether the rights of people have been respected in the course of development, whether the benefits and burdens of development have been justly distributed, or whether decisions regarding development priorities have been democratically made, have been raised in many countries. Hence, development has become the subject of considerable controversy today. The models of development which have been adopted in different countries have become the subject of debate and criticism, and alternative models have been put forward. In such a situation, the broader understanding of development can serve as a standard by which the development experience of a country is examined. 10.2 The challenge of development. The concept of development gained importance after the second half of the 20th century. This was the time when a large number of countries in Asia and Africa gained political independence. Most were impoverished and their populations had a low standard of living. Education, health and other facilities were poor. They were often described as underdeveloped, or developing. The comparison was with the richer countries in Western Europe and the United States. In the 1950s and 1960s, when most countries of Asia and Africa had achieved independence from colonial rule, the most urgent task in front of them was to solve the pressing problems of poverty, malnourishment, unemployment, illiteracy and the lack of basic amenities that a majority of their populations faced. They argued that the reason why they were backward was because under colonial rule their resources had been used not for their own benefit but for the benefit of their colonial masters. With independence, they could reorganize their resources in the best possible manner to serve their national interests. Therefore, it was now possible for them to formulate such policies which would allow them to overcome their backwardness and move towards achieving the standards of their former colonial masters. This provided the impetus for these countries to undertake development projects. The concept of development has undergone many changes over the years. In the initial years, the focus was on catching up with the West in terms of economic growth and modernization of societies. Developing countries adopted goals like faster economic growth through industrialization, modernization of agriculture, and extending and modernizing education. It was believed at the time that the state was the only agency capable of initiating this kind of social and economic change. Many countries embarked upon ambitious projects of development, often with the help of loans and aid from the developed countries. In India, a series of 5-year plans for development were made starting from the 1950s, and these included a number of mega projects such as the Bikran-Angle Dam, setting up steel plants in different parts of the country, mining, fertilizer production, and improving agricultural techniques. It was hoped that a multi-pronged strategy would have an impact on the economy and significantly increase the wealth of the country. It was also hoped that the emerging prosperity would gradually trickle down to the poorest sections of society and help to reduce inequality. A great deal of faith was placed in adopting the latest discoveries of science and state-of-the-art technologies. New educational institutions like the Indian Institutes of Technology were set up in collaboration with advanced countries in order to have access to their knowledge became a top priority. It was believed that the process of development would make the society more modern and forward-looking and set it on the path of growth. However, the model of development adopted by India and other countries has come under a great deal of criticism over the years, and this has led to some rethinking about the goals and processes of development today. 10.3 Criticisms of development. Models. Critics of development have pointed out that the kind of development models which have been adopted in many countries has proved very costly for the developing countries. The financial costs have been enormous, putting many countries into long-term debt. Africa is still suffering from the enormous debts which it ran up by borrowings from the richer countries. The gains in terms of growth have not been commensurate, and poverty and disease continue to plague the continent. The social costs of development. This model of development has also had high social costs. A large number of people have been displaced from their homes and localities due to the construction of big dams, industrial activities and mining activities, or other projects. Displacement results in loss of livelihood and increases impoverishment. If rural agricultural communities are displaced from their traditional occupations and regions, they end up at the margins of society, swelling the large number of urban and rural poor. Traditional skills acquired over an extended period may be lost. There is also a loss of culture, because when people are relocated they lose a whole way of community life. Such displacement has led to struggles in many countries. Displaced people have not always accepted their fate passively. You may have heard about the Narmada Bachao Andolan, which has been leading a movement against the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the river Narmada for many years. The supporters of this big dam claim that it will generate electricity, help irrigate large areas of land and also provide drinking water to the desert areas of Kutch and Saurashtra. The opponents of the dam dispute these claims. They claim that almost 1 million people have displaced. They have lost their lands through submergence, a construction, and consequently lost their livelihood. Most of these people belong to the tribal and Dalit communities who constitute some of the most underprivileged groups in the country. Some even argue that the dam would greatly upset the ecological balance, submerging large tracts of forests. Environmental costs of development. Development has indeed caused a high degree of environmental degradation in many countries, and not just the displaced people but all of the population is beginning to feel the consequences. When the tsunami hit the South and Southeast Asian coasts last year, it was observed that the destruction of mangroves and the building of commercial enterprises along the shoreline was the reason for the greater extent of the damage caused. You must have read about global warming. The ice in the Arctic and Antarctic is melting because of increased emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and this has the potential to cause floods and actually submerge low-lying areas like Bangladesh and the Maldives. In the long term, the ecological crisis will adversely affect all of us. Air pollution is already a problem which does not discriminate between the rich and the poor. But in the short term, indiscriminate use of resources tends to adversely affect the underprivileged more sharply. Loss of forests affects the poor who use forest resources for a variety of subsistence needs like firewood, medicinal herbs or food. Drying up of rivers and ponds and falling groundwater levels means that women have to walk longer in order to procure water. The model of development we are pursuing is heavily dependent on the increasing use of energy. Most of the energy currently generated in the world is from non-renewable sources like coal or petroleum. Large tracts of the Amazon rainforests are being deforested in order to provide for the increased consumer need. Are there enough of these non-renewable resources which can allow not only the advanced countries but all people in the world to enjoy an affluent lifestyle? Given the finite nature of these resources, the answer would be no. What about the future generations? Are we going to hand over a depleted earth and multiple problems to them? Assessing development. It could not of course be said that development has had only negative effects for the world. Some countries have had some success in increasing their rate of economic growth and even in reducing poverty. But overall, inequalities have not been seriously reduced and poverty continues to be a problem in the developing world. As we saw earlier, it was assumed that the benefits of growth would trickle down to the poorest and most unprivileged sections of the society and thereby raise the standards of living of all. However, the world over, the gap between the rich and the poor has been widening. A country may have high rates of growth, but that does not necessarily translate into a fair distribution of its benefits. When economic growth and redistribution do not go together, the benefits are likely to be cornered by those who are already privileged. It is now increasingly being recognized that there is a need to adopt a broader notion of development. An excessive focus on economic growth has not only given rise to a wide range of problems, but even economic growth has not always been satisfactory. Hence, development is now being viewed in broader terms as a process which should improve the quality of life of all the people. If development is understood as a process which aims to improve the quality of life of people, it could be argued that measuring the rate of economic growth alone would be an inadequate and at times misleading indicator of development. There is now a search for alternative ways of measuring development. One such attempt is the Human Development Report, which is annually brought out by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. This report ranks countries on the basis of their performance in social indicators like literacy and education levels, life expectancy and maternal mortality rates. This measure is called the Human Development Index. According to this conception, development should be a process which allows more and more people to make meaningful choices, and the precondition for this is the fulfillment of basic needs like food, education, health and shelter. This is called the basic needs approach. Popular slogans like Roti, Kapde Aur Makan, Gary B. Hatau, Bili, Sadik, Pani convey the sentiment that without the fulfillment of basic needs, it is impossible for an individual to live a dignified life and pursue her desires. Freedom from want or deprivation is the key to effectively exercising one's choices and pursuing one's desires. In this view, if people die of starvation or cold due to lack of food and shelter, or if children are working instead of being in school, this is indicative of a state of underdevelopment. Let's think. Gather information, news reports, articles, charts, tables, about the Human Development Index from the latest Human Development Report available to you. Form different groups in the class and have each group make a presentation on the following: India's changing HDI rank. India's rank compared to its neighbors. Different components of the HDI and India's score on each. Compare HDI data for India with figures for economic growth of the country. Ken. Sa. OWIWA. Just imagine that a hidden treasure is found in your backyard. How will you feel if the treasure is taken away little by authorities in the name of development? This development is not reflected in your standard of living or even in facilities for the colony you stay in. Further, your house as a site for the treasure is constantly vandalized by people who claim use the treasure for development. Isn't it gross injustice for the people in whose house the treasure has been unearthed? Oil had been found in the region of Ogunai in Nigeria in 1950s, which resulted in crude oil exploration. Soon economic growth and big business created around it an entangled web of political intrigues, environmental problems and corruption. This prevented development of the very region where oil had been found. Ken Saro-Iwa, an Ogunai by birth, was recognized as an author, journalist and television producer in the 1980s. In his work, he observed and reacted to the exploitation around him as the oil and gas industry took riches from beneath the feet of the poor Oganai farmers, and in return left the land polluted and the people disenfranchised. Sarawak led a non-violent struggle with the launch of the Movement for the Survival of the Oganai People, MASOP, in 1990, an open, grassroots community-based political movement. The movement was so effective that by 1993 the oil companies had to pull out of Oganai. But Sarawak paid the price for this. The military rulers of Nigeria framed him in a murder case and the military tribunal sentenced him to death. Sarawak said that the military rulers were doing this on behest of Shell, the multinational oil company that had to withdraw from the Oganai region. Human rights organizations all over the world protested against this trial and appealed for his release. Ignoring this worldwide protest, the Nigerian rulers executed Ken Sarawak in 1995. Environmentalism. You must have often heard terms like pollution, waste management, sustainable development, protection of endangered species and global warming. These are the buzzwords of the environmental movement which works to protect natural resources and ecosystems. Environmentalists maintain that human beings should learn to live in harmony with the rhythms of the ecosystem and not manipulate the natural environment to serve their immediate interests. They believe that mankind is using up and destroying natural resources to such an extent that we will bequeath only a barren earth, poisoned rivers and polluted air to future generations. The roots of environmentalism can be traced back to the 19th century revolt against industrialization. Today, the environmental movement has become a worldwide phenomenon with thousands of non-governmental groups and even some green political parties. Some well-known environmental groups include Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund, and in India we have the Chipko movement which emerged to protect the Himalayan forests. Such groups try to pressurize governments to modify their industrial and developmental policies in the light of environmental goals. Alternative conceptions of development. In the preceding sections we discussed some of the limitations of the model of development pursued so far. There have been huge costs, both human and environmental, of development policies, and the costs and benefits of development have been unequally distributed among people. Further, the strategies of development adopted in most countries have been top-down, that is, the selection of development priorities and strategies and the actual implementation of projects were all generally decided by the higher levels of the political leadership and bureaucracy. There was often little consultation with the people whose lives would be most immediately affected by development projects. Neither was there experience and the knowledge acquired over centuries utilized, nor were their interests taken into account. This was as true of democratic countries as of dictatorial ones. Development thus became a process designed and implemented by the ruling sections in the country, who have also often been the major beneficiaries of development projects. This has underscored the need to think of alternative ways of understanding and pursuing development which are equitable and sustainable. Issues of rights, equality, freedom, justice and democracy have all been raised in the process. In this section, we shall examine how these concepts have taken on newer meanings in the context of the development debate. Right claims. We have noted how the benefits of development have been largely cornered by the powerful and the costs of the development model have been borne by the poorest and vulnerable sections of the population, whether due to ecological degradation or due to displacement and loss of livelihood. One of the issues which has been raised is regarding the protections that affected people can claim from the state and the society as a whole. In a democracy, do people have a right to be consulted in decisions which directly affect their lives? Do they have a right to livelihood which they can claim when in government threatens their source of livelihood? Another issue is regarding rights to natural resources. Can communities claim traditional rights to the use of natural resources? This particularly applies to tribal and aboriginal communities who have a specific way of community life and relationship to the environment. The crucial issue here is to whom do natural resources belong? Is it the local community, the state concerned, or are they a common resource of all humanity? If we understand resources as common to humanity, then humanity would include future generations as well. Negotiating the competing demands of different sections of a population as well as achieving a balance between the claims of the present and future is the task of democracies. Democratic participation. How many times have you been told that you must do something, say, obey your parents or teachers, for your own good? And have you felt like saying, if it is good for me, please let me decide that myself? The distinction between democracy and dictatorship is that in a democracy conflicts over resources, or different visions of the good life, are resolved through debate and a respect for the rights of all, and these cannot be imposed from above. Thus, if everyone in a society has a common stake in achieving a better life, then everyone needs to be involved in formulating the goals of development and in devising ways of implementing it. There is a difference between following a plan made by others and sharing in the formulation of the plans. Firstly, even if others make plans with the best intentions, they are likely to be less aware than you about your specific needs. Secondly, being an active part of the decision-making process is empowering. Both democracy and development are concerned with realizing the common good. By what process can the common good be defined? In democratic countries, the right of people to participate in decision-making is emphasized. One of the ways which has been suggested to ensure participation is to allow local decision-making bodies to take decisions about development projects in the local area. Increasing the powers and resources of local bodies is thus being advocated. On the one hand, it is argued that people have to be consulted on issues which most affect them, and it should be possible to reject projects which can adversely affect the community. On the other, it is said that involvement in planning and formulating policies allows people to direct resources towards their needs. Where a road must be laid, what should be the route of the metro or local buses, where a park or school should be located, whether a village needs a check dam or an internet cafe should be decisions which must be taken by them. It was argued above that the prevailing model of development is top-down, and tends to view people as objects of development. It assumes that there is one best way to arrive at solutions for our problems. In the process, the accumulated knowledge and experiences of people may be ignored. A decentralized approach to development makes it possible to use various kinds of technologies, traditional and modern, in a creative manner. Let's think. These pictures are of Satyagraha in the village of Domkedi in the Narmada Valley. As a result of the construction of the Sardar Sarovar Dam, the waters of the Narmada flooded the valley. The Narmada Bachao Andolan protesters chose to face the rising waters. When the waters rose dangerously up to the shoulders of the activists, the government arrested them. Find out more about this controversy and discuss the merits and demerits of big dams. Is the Sardar Sarovar Dam a good way to solve the problem of water shortage? Were the activists justified in offering resistance to this government scheme? Development and LIFE style. An alternative model of development would also try to move away from the high-cost, ecologically wasteful, technology-driven notion of development. Development should not be measured only by the number of cell phones in the country, or by the sophisticated weapons which are developed, or by the size of the cars which people drive, but by the quality of life enjoyed by people in terms of happiness and harmony and satisfaction of essential needs. At one level, efforts should be made to conserve natural resources and use renewable sources of energy as far as is possible. Efforts such as rainwater harvesting, solar and biogas plants, microhydel projects, compost pits to generate manure out of organic waste are examples in this direction. Such activities have to take place at a local level and therefore demand higher involvement from people. Big projects are not the only way to effect big improvement. Opponents of big dams have advocated a series of small dams and bunds which require much less investment, cause minimal displacement and can be beneficial to the local population. At another level, there is also a need to scale down our need for non-renewable resources by changing lifestyles. This is a tricky issue because it may appear as if people are being asked to accept a lower standard of living, and this could also be seen as a curtailment of their freedom to choose. But debating the possibility of alternative lifestyles could also mean increasing avenues for freedom and creativity by opening up alternative visions of the good life. However, any such policy would call for a high degree of cooperation between governments and people across countries. This would mean adopting democratic methods of decision-making on such matters. But if we understand development as a process of enhancing one's freedoms, and think of people not as passive consumers but as active participants in deciding development goals, it should be possible to reach agreement on such issues. In the process, our notions of rights, freedom and justice would be extended. Conclusion. The idea of development refers to the desire for a better life. This is a very powerful desire, and the hope of improvement is a driving force of human action. In this chapter we have seen how widely accepted versions of what constitutes improvement have come under critical scrutiny. there is a multi-pronged search for a more equitable, sustainable and democratic model of development. In the process, a number of concepts of political theory such as equality, democracy and rights, have been reinterpreted. The issues that have arisen while pursuing the goal of development reveal that the choices we make have an impact upon others, other human beings and other species in the world. We must therefore see ourselves as part of the larger universe, for our fates are linked together. Besides, my actions not only affect others, they also have an impact upon my own future possibilities. We need therefore to choose carefully, keeping in mind not just our present needs but also our long-term interests. Document finished.